Please join me. Is that on? Please join me in Gasho. All things are impermanent and non-substantial, like the moon in the water, a lightning flash, or the dew. For all beings, the Buddha expounds the Dharma that cannot be expressed in words. Therefore, I pay homage to Amida Buddha, the most honored one. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandots. 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 Good morning. Reverend Kobata and about 20 of our members are all enjoying breakfast down in Japantown for the Japantown Senior breakfast that is, they're honoring one of our own, Mrs. Sadako Kashiwagi, this morning. So we have a nice large contingent down there this morning, and I'm grateful for that. That particular verse that I just read was from Junirai, which we chant at least once a month during Shoshiki Hoyo service, but oftentimes during special services as well. And it's the 9th verse of the Gatha, and it beautifully expresses the wisdom and strength that sustains us in difficult times. It's a core instruction, really, of how to live with clarity and with appreciation of our precious impermanence and our profound interdependence. I think that the last part of that verse, the Dharma that cannot be expressed in words, is especially notable. Because oftentimes language not only serves to help us communicate and understand things, but it can also serve to limit, to control, to reinforce and solidify our biased perceptions. A couple weeks ago, I did an interfaith service called the Me Too Mass, and it was held at Grace Evangelical Lutheran Church. I had done previous interfaith services with one of the creators of this service, Reverend Susan Strauss, but it was put together by Reverend Dr. Megan Rohr and Reverend Dr. Susan Strauss, who are both evangelical Lutheran ministers. Reverend Rohr had traveled to Norway last year for an ecumenical gathering of evangelical Lutherans. And the Me Too Mass, or a Me Too Mass, was offered to the group by the female Lutheran minister, female Lutheran bishop of Norway, and the female Lutheran bishop of Sweden. And so this service last year deeply moved Reverend Megan. And so she wanted to offer it to her congregation here in the United States. So Reverend Megan and Reverend Susan and the female U.S. and a female U.S. bishop, well, their very presence challenged my own judgments about evangelical. There's a spectrum of evangelical, just like with Buddhists. When I say I'm a Buddhist, people often think of the Dalai Lama, and they think of loving kindness and compassion, and it's very positive. But sometimes, a few times, I've gotten some folks who've associated Buddhism with the self-identified Buddhist monks in Myanmar, who are promoting and participating in ethnic cleansing of the Muslim Rohingya. And although I can argue that the Myanmar monks are not Buddhist because they're promoting and practicing savage ethnic cleansing, which is so contrary to the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, every time I see an article about Myanmar, it always says this Buddhist country or those Buddhist rebel monks, etc., etc. So even within Buddhism, there's quite a difference in perceived perspective. Or in Sri Lanka, where Christian and Muslim groups have long said that they faced oppression from the Buddhist Sinhalese majority, and they face increasing intimidation from some of the extremist Buddhist monks in recent years, pressuring the government to actually close their churches. I want to take a moment right now to acknowledge and remember the over 200 men, women, and children who were murdered this morning in a series of cowardly and horrific bombings in 3 Christian churches and 4 hotels throughout Sri Lanka, where folks were attending their Easter services. So there's a spectrum even for Buddhists. And I would argue that these Buddhist groups are confusing ethnic culture and nationalism for the teachings of the Buddha. When I had coffee with Reverend Susan 2 weeks ago, I shared how my limited, biased perception of evangelical had really changed from the experience of doing service with her and Reverend Megan at Reverend Megan's church. And she chuckled and she said, yeah, that perception is a problem for many of us. Reverend Susan explained that the word evangelical comes from the Greek word evangelion, which simply means good news. So while Reverend Susan and Reverend Megan identify themselves in their traditions as followers of the good news, or the Gospels, other self-identified evangelical groups have taken this word to mean very specific things, like born again, while others have taken it to mean a supporter of our current administration and their less than compassionate policies. The use of evangelical in these two examples frustrated Reverend Susan just as much as the use of radical Buddhist monks frustrates me. So this experience at Grace Evangelical Lutheran Church deeply challenged my fixed and limited notion of what it means to be evangelical, because it was such an open-hearted and open-minded community. Everyone was welcomed, and the attendance was wonderfully diverse. The idea of a Me Too Mass really spoke to a lot of people. And the Mass was also live streamed with 241 folks participating online. The Mass was divided into 3 cycles: injury, samsara, and liberation. Sounds kind of Buddhist, yeah? The themes? Yeah. I was invited to contribute to the samsara cycle, specifically to talk about institutional patriarchy within the context of samsara, which also was to be supported by my personal experiences. So with institutional patriarchy, culture is often used to justify gender inequality, gender discrimination, and gender oppression by perpetuating traditional cultural beliefs about women and their roles. And traditional patriarchal communities are often patrilineal. That's where the title and or property are inherited only through the male lines, as in the case with our tradition, the Nishihonganji in Kyoto, Japan. And this becomes problematic and deeply incongruent when our whole theology is based on inherent equality of all beings. Our whole theology here in Shin and in Buddhism is based on the inherent equality of all beings. So even we need to look at the relationship between culture and our Buddhist doctrine. Samsara is a Sanskrit word, which literally means wandering on. It's the cycle of aimless drifting, of wandering on and on. But samsara is not so much a place as it is the process by which we create and recreate our own suffering. And it is the confused state of suffering from which Buddhists seek liberation. Samsara is maintained through the cycling of our conditioned nature. Our minds are endlessly circling the same mistaken track, maybe endlessly running to something or endlessly running away from something. Or maybe we're just ignoring something. How do we change the track? Awareness, insight, understanding, and courage are all expressions of stepping off the same mistaken track and stepping onto one that is healthy, compassionate, and loving for ourselves and for others. Our tradition's founder, Shinran Shonin, chose Nagarjuna, the first of our 7 masters of Jodo Shinshu, as the first of our 7 masters of Jodo Shinshu. Nagarjuna was a brilliant monk and philosopher in the 1st century India, and is recognized as the founder of the Middle Way school of Mahayana Buddhism, of which Jodo Shinshu is a part of. The Middle Way is not based on aversion to the world, nor attachment, but a way based on inclusion and compassion. His writings serve to clarify the concept of independent interdependent origination, the law of causality, which the historical Buddha Siddhartha Gautama awakened to under the Bodhi tree 2,700 years ago. According to this law, nothing has independent, permanent, or absolute existence. Everything is part of a limitless web of interconnections and undergoes a continual process of change and transformation. Every appearance arises from complex causes and conditions, and in turn continues to produce other countless causes and conditions. This is what is written in Junirai. All things are impermanent and non-substantial, like the moon and water, a lightning flash, or the dew. Nagarjuna was such a prolific writer, and many important Buddhist works are attributed to him. In addition to writing the Gatha Junirai, which expresses his gratitude to Amida Buddha and which has become a staple, really, in our Shin tradition, he also addressed the tension that is known in Buddhism as the two truths. The truth of this finite, conventional, limited world, and the truth of the ultimate reality, which we call Amida Buddha. Nagarjuna explains, without a foundation in the conventional truth, the significance of the ultimate cannot be taught. Without understanding the significance of the ultimate, liberation is not achieved. What I think he's saying is that we need to look at and we need to acknowledge the reality of dukkha, right? The dis-ease, suffering, and our own foolishness in this world and within our own lives. We need to see it for what it is and to see the causes and conditions of its arising. Because that understanding then allows us to move forward in a way that is wise, that is honest, and that is truly helpful. Or as the Reverend David Matsumoto says, aware, authentic, and full of appreciation. This is the Dharma that cannot be expressed in words, but is expressed in how we live our lives. So an Nembutsu practitioner lives everyday life holding Namo Amida Butsu in our heart and in our mind, and pronouncing Namo Amida Butsu in gratitude for the oneness of this life that we receive, and for the Buddhist compassion, and for the boundless compassion supporting and sustaining us always, especially in these often challenging and perfectly imperfect conditions. As we go out today to celebrate our oneness by walking in or cheering on our BCSF temple community in the San Francisco Cherry Blossom Parade today, let us remember the meaning of our Gatha Junirai. To close, I'd like to share a quote from Reverend Briones, Nishi Honganji, LA, who echoes the meaning of Nagarjuna's words. Our lives are interconnected. All beings are equally embraced by Amida Buddha. Everyone is included, everyone. As a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, our goal is to awaken to this spiritual truth of interdependency and equality. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandots. 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 And I hope to see you all at Cherry Blossom Parade today. Thank you.